Hey guys, welcome back to Untitled Tale. It's Kev here. I've got a little treat for us today. I've had this book going back about 10 years, something like that. So I've had it for a while. Now, it got shelved like Woody when I got new toys. You know, I've got built up a little library now, but it's all. I was always into your more ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt kind of history. I never really gave Britain too much thought. Because as we're taught through the mainstream, British history is like basically redundant. It's like a load of barbarians came up with a load of mythology and all this kind of stuff. But it's as we're growing, as we're developing, we're starting to see that's not the case. Now, I just wanted to read, like I say, a chapter out of this book, and it's the basically just about Britain, ancient Britain. Um, where is it? Just let me get this chapter up real quick. There we go. So it's ancient Britons, and it's only 7 pages long. So I'm going to get into it. It goes into a lot of details. To be honest, it talks about Gog Magog, the lost tribes, obviously Brutus and Aeneas. It goes into it, other people's opinions, and breaks it down. Now, I just had a little skip through it there, and I will warn you guys in advance. I'm not the greatest at vocalising when I read, because obviously I do a lot of reading in the head kind of thing, mental reading. But I am hopefully getting a bit better. Maybe one day I'll get that nice soft-spoken David Attenborough voice, but we're not quite there yet. But yeah, I'm going to get straight into it, so I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. Please leave a like and subscribe, because since I've started sharing flat earth videos and going into real history rather than fake stuff, man, do you want to see the stats on my channel? They have took a hit, mate. They have took a big hit. But we're in it for the truth, we're not in it for the money, so it's not about finances, it's about passion, about history. So yeah, like I say, stick around. I'm going to get straight into it. I'll see you all soon. Take care.
I'm conquering this fear, I'm busting through the ceiling. I'm following your lead, I'm following this feeling.
The Ancient Britons. Albion became Britain in the long aftermath of the Trojan War. When the city fell to the Greeks, Aeneas, one of its nobles, escaped with a large party of companions and made his way to Italy. So Virgil relates in his Aeneid. After many adventures, the Trojans founded a settlement, and the Romans were descended from them. Virgil introduced Aeneas' son, Ascanius, and he takes the family no further, apart from a brief foreshadowing. But in Britain, it is told how Ascanius had a son, Silvius. Soothsayers predicted that his son would be the death of his parents, though later he would rise to high honour. This son was called Brutus. His mother, Silvius' wife, died giving birth to him, and when he grew up, he accidentally shot Silvius with an arrow while hunting. Banished from Italy, Brutus went to Greece. The Greek king, Pandrasus, had several thousand slaves descended from Trojan prisoners of war. Brutus organised a revolt and captured Pandrasus, who allowed him to lead the Trojans away wherever he would. They assembled a fleet and set sail. On a deserted island, they discovered a temple of Diana. Brutus ritually consulted the goddess, and she appeared to him in a dream and told him of another island, a far greater one out in the ocean towards the sunset. She mentioned the giants who had been in possession of it, but assured Brutus that they were now extinct, or nearly so. They could establish a new Troy and father a dynasty of kings who would be the most powerful on earth. Much encouraged, the Trojans coasted along Africa to Gibraltar, where they met another party of their own kinsfolk, whose leader was Cornelius. Joining forces
the whole company passed through Gaul, where they founded the city of Tours. But Gaul was no abiding place. They came at last to Albion, sailed up the Dart and disembarked at Totnes. Brutus stepped ashore on a rock and announced, "Here I am, and here I rest, and this town shall be called Totnes." That, at any rate, is the English version of what he said. The rock is the Brutus Stone, now removed to a high street near Eastgate. Brutus renamed the island Britain after himself, and his companions were consequently called Britons. Their form of the Trojan language became British. The giants had indeed almost died out, and most of the handful that were left remained in Cornwall. Some of these came over to Brutus's encampment and made an attack which failed, with the slaughter. One, Gog Magog, was taken alive, and Carinius, who was extremely strong, wrestled with him and threw him off a cliff into the sea. Cornwall takes its name from Carinius, whom Brutus made its overlord. Spencer, in his account of the giant of Albion, says he was an ancestor of the Britons, and thus implies there was not a complete break between the peoples. Possibly the larger Trojans married the smaller surviving giants. The Trojans, or rather the Britons, explored the island and built a capital, Troia Nova, the new Troy, at the confluence of the rivers Fleet and Thames. Troia Nova was later corrupted into Trinovantium. Later again, the city became London. In London, in a place called Cannon Street, was an altar set up by Brutus in honour of Diana, his divine guide. So long as the stone of Brutus is safe, so long shall London flourish. Brutus, a king, built his palace on the future site of the Guildhall, where effigies of giants were one day to stand. His capital was completed at the time of the priest Eli, who ruled in Israel. Thus began the Britons. After more than 1,000 years, they were to lose ground, and their descendants exist today as the Welsh and the Cornish. Some claim that even apart from the hypothetical demi-giants, the Trojans were not the sole constituent of the old British population. More important were immigrants who arrived centuries afterwards, in wave after wave, after traversing the length of Europe, and these were none other than the tribes of Israel. Dispossessed from the Holy Land by the Assyrians, they reached Britain with providential guidance and accepted the kingship of the royal line founded by Brutus. The composite British nation is a branch of the chosen people of God, as surely as the Jews. Brutus is first documented, if that is the word, in a confused Latin work of Welsh provenance, the Historia Britannium, History of the Britons. This dates from the early 9th century AD and has commonly been ascribed to Nennius, a monk of Bangor. The ascription is open to doubt, but with that clearly understood, the author may be called Nennius for convenience. Properly speaking, he is a compiler and an artless one, so he is unlikely to have invented the story for himself. He gives the hero's name in two forms, Brutus and Burrito, with the implication that he has heard alternative versions. But there is no previous evidence in writing, though speculation of the same type were current among the Franks on the continent. Nennius safeguards biblical ethnic views by giving Brutus, or Brito, a pedigree going back to Japheth, son of Noah. However, he is brief. The full quasi-historical account is a vast expansion by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the Middle Ages. It was seriously believed. Chaucer addresses Henry IV as a conqueror of Brutus of Albion. Further details are fanciful offshoots from Geoffrey or from chroniclers copying him. The Brutus Stone, for instance, probably got its name and legend from wishful thinking. It may be a 15th century boundary marker, actually called the Broad Stone. Brutus' saga is literary rather than popular. Some unknown reader of Virgil, impressed by what he says about the Trojans' ancestry of the Romans, had the notion of taking the story further and giving the Britons the same honourable origin. The Britons in question are the inhabitants of the island during the last centuries BC. Celtic in language and culture, they were akin to the Gaelic peoples of Ireland, but unlike the Irish, they were brought into the Roman Empire. They maintained control for a while after ceasing to belong to it, and were then partially supplanted by Anglo-Saxons. Their separated descendants, the Welsh in Wales, Cumbria, Strathclyde, the Cornish. The related Britons preserved vague traditions of glorious unity in the past. One of Geoffrey's main purposes is to substantiate these traditions with a splendid national history. He picks up the Brutus tale as an excellent beginning. There does not seem to be any factual basis, even in the sense that the Trojans' advent could echo a real one from some other quarter. Celtic Britons in the pre-Roman Iron Age have a recognisable identity about the 6th century BC. An opinion which long prevailed with archaeological grounding was that they entered the island in a series of immigrations from the continent. Halsat Celts came from then Latenia Celts, then Belgic Celts. Phases can undoubtedly be distinguished, but the mass invasions like early ones by Beaker folk and others are now somewhat discounted. Celticity, as it may be called, was probably more linguistical and cultural than ethnic, a cumulative product of a variety of developments: economic, social, technological and artistic. The need for a swift and exterminatory contract may have been his motive in bringing the Trojans ashore near Cornwall, where the standing stone suggested a lingering presence, though the further on in history he shows a continuing fondness for Totnes as a port of entry. While he is dimly aware of an earlier people and a later people, megalith builders and Celtic Britons, chronology is against him. The conventional date for the fall of Troy, 1183 BC, is one he has to respect. His synchronization with Eli, taken from Nennius, makes Brutus build his capital somewhat about 1100. The transition from the giants to ancient Britons is too late for the end of the megalithic age, too early for the beginning of the Celt, in any clearly defined sense. As often names are meant to supply etymologies which are quite erroneous, Britain is on the record in many different spellings. Greek and Welsh writers indicate that the initial letter may once have been a P, in which case connection can be traced with Celtic words meaning figure or picture, and the references may be to the natives' custom of tattooing themselves with designs of the woad. The same image is thought to underlie the naming of the Picts in the north. Cornwall goes back to British tribal names. The Brutus city, the Proto-London. Geoffrey is ingenious. Roman authors tell of a British tribal grouping in Essex, the Trinovantes. Nennius and Henry of Huntingdon, a historian writing in 1129 or thereabouts, thought this name was derived from the city Trinovantium. Geoffrey adopts Trinitantium and makes out that it is really Troia Nova, thus arriving as he desires at New Troy. For the giant Gog Magog, whose name he spells variously, he may have taken the hint from the Cornish word. Plymouth Hoe has been claimed as the scene of the wrestling, on the strength of the giant figure was formerly cut into the turf. Gog Magog appear in the Bible, Ezekiel 38:2, Revelation 20:7-8, with an air of evil mystery. The first of the giant effigies set up in the London Guildhall in the 15th century represented Gog Magog and his opposite Quirinius. They were destroyed in the Great Fire of 1666, and new ones were set up in 1708. By that time, the knowledge that Gog and Magog were distinct was too strong, and the effigies were said to portray giants, so named, whom Brutus employed as servants in his palace. Gog and Magog were also wiped out by bombings, and new effigies replaced them, as the London Stone. As for the London Stone, a remnant of which is still in the wall of St. Within's Church, it may have been a Roman marker from which distances were measured, but there is serious evidence for a city temple of Diana. Alexander Pope, towards the end of his life, planned a narrative poem centred on Brutus. This is an instance of a feature of English literature, the national epic that has never got written. Pope's poem was to be modelled on the Aeneid and would have expressed his ideas of good government and true religion. He seems not to have paid much attention to Geoffrey in his scheme for the epic. Brutus and his followers depart from Troy, ruined by its own corruption, to found an ideal commonwealth in some foreign land. Having doubts about the known world, they sail onto the Atlantic and land at Tenerife, where some elect to remain. The rest reach Britain after adventures that tax Brutus's benign leadership and come ashore at Torbay. The island is inhabited not only by the giant but by normal-sized population, whose priests and sorceresses are hostile. Brutus insists on good conduct towards the natives and finally founds his commonwealth, and finally founds his community, which unites and civilises the country. After a lifetime of brilliant heroic couplets, Pope turned to the blank verse for his epic, perhaps with the reminiscence of Milton. Only the first 8 lines have survived, and they may have been written more, and so follows. The patient chief, who labouring long arrived on Britain's shores, and brought with favouring gods art, arms, and honour to her ancient sons, daughter of memory from elder time, recalled me with Britain's glory fared, me far from meaner care or meaner song, snatched to the holy hill of spotless bay, my country's poet to record her fame. Dr. Johnson thought the whole project misguided. The British Israel theories is the principal modern myth in style of the older ones, and worthy of note such. It belongs to a class of speculation arising out of the history of ancient Israel, God's chosen people. According to scripture, the 12 Israelite tribes descended from their patriarch Jacob, escaped from Egyptian captivity under Moses' leadership, and shared out Canaan, the promised land. Under David and Solomon they were united, but soon afterwards they split apart, a southern kingdom of Judah centered on Jerusalem was made up of tribes of Judah and Benjamin, plus some Levites. A northern kingdom taking the name of Israel for itself comprised of all the rest. Both endured for some time, but in 734 BC, the Assyrian king Tilgath-Pileser III invaded the north and deported many of its people. In 721, Sargon II carried off many more, destroying their capital, Samaria, and leaving only a leaderless peasantry. Soon swamped by settlers from other parts of the Assyrian Empire, Judea survived but fell to the Babylonians in 587. Here too there was a mass deportation through some of the exiles, though some of the exiles were allowed to return after Babylon itself fell to the Persians. The descendants of the southern deportees are the Jews, but continues to be a portion of Israel in this proper comprehensive sense. But who are the descendants of the northern ones? The lost 10 tribes? According to the Jewish traditional belief, which British Israelites accept in this instance, they must still exist somewhere because God's covenant applies to all 12 and cannot be rendered as void. In the future Messianic age, the lost tribes will be reunited with the Jews in the Promised Land. In Ezekiel 37:21-4, the Lord says, "Behold, I will take the people of Israel from the nations among whom they have gone, and will gather from all sides, and bring them to their own land. I will make them one nation in the land, and they shall be no longer two nations, and no longer divided into two kingdoms. My servant David shall be king over them." On this logic, there is no need to prove that the lost tribes still exist, because they must, otherwise the prophecies could not be fulfilled. The problem is to identify them, and they have been identified as the Japanese, the ancient Mexicans and others, while British Israelites assert that they made their way to Britain in several waves, and all the natives of the island today, those at least ancestrally rooted in the island, are of Israelite stock. This idea proposed in the heyday of the British Empire because the prophecies promised the chosen people's widespread power and glory of a kind the Jewish branch has never enjoyed. The only scriptural clue to the northernist movement in the apocryphal book 2 Esdras, which says, chapters 13:40-6, that they left the land where the Assyrians had settled them and went by way of the upper Euphrates, Azareth, taking 1.5 years on the journey. Azareth means simply another land, but British Israelites claim that it was north of the Black Sea. They draw attention to the geographical and ethnic names, and note especially that early authors locate the Sumerians here. Working backwards, they point out the Assyrian inscriptions call the northern Israelites the people of Omri, after one of their best known kings, Omri. It is argued could become Cymru, and then hence the Cymrians working forward, which are the Welsh. They identify Cimmerians with Cymru, the name which the Welsh, who are the principal remnant of the Celtic Britons, apply to themselves. Thus etymology traces a folk movement all the way via southern Russia. Cimmeri in fact means fellow countrymen, and it is not used till a comparatively late date, when the Welsh wanted to affirm solidarity against the English. As will appear further, Israelite movements are traced by similar arguments, and Brutus is woven into the scheme. Being Anania's great-grandson, he would have been descended from Dardanus, the founder of Troy. Dardanus, British Israelites explain, is the same person as Dara or Dardra, a godson of Judah, whose descendants by other lines formed the Israelite tribe of that name. 1 Chronicles 2.6, Genesis 38 through 30. This pedigree gives Brutus and his Trojans in general a collateral kinship with the chosen people, which would have qualified them to prepare Britain for the reconstruction of the Israelite stock whenever the northern waves arrived. British Israel reached its apogee in 1936. After the First World War, Palestine had come under British rule, and one of the British policies was to establish a Jewish homeland there. Ezekiel's prophecy of reunion in the Promised Land seemed to be on the road to fulfillment. Edward VIII, known to his intimates as David, was a monarch of the right name, but after his accession, followed by the end of the British reign in Palestine and the British Empire in general, the prophecy's arguments, at least at the present, came to grief. Though British Israel goes on, little is left of its old basis. It has been suspected that the idea began in a pun. The word British suggests Hebrew British, meaning covenant man. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for stopping by. Catch you in the next one. Peace.
I'm conquering this